Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And we want to know where you are in the world. So drop that in the chat when you say hello. I'm Micha Go Big, founder of Go Big Coaching and Communications. Welcome to Go Big with Micha. And the person I'm talking to today is Alexandria Stobie, and I'm super, super excited. We have fellow coaches for women in tech. That's how we met, how we were introduced, but we have different priorities a little. And so I absolutely wanted her to come on here on this LinkedIn Live and share her approach. So welcome, Alexandria. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, like you already said, we have some crossover with coaching women in tech. I would say the main crossover that we have is one of the things I help my clients with is becoming confident with their leadership style and stepping into what that looks like for them. Other things that I often hear from people is struggling with those hard conversations that nobody taught them how to have until they got a coach or until they actually came across one. So finding their way style as a leader, and specifically a human-centered leader, because that's very much what I coach people on, is always putting that person that's in front of you first.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second. One question I would like you to ask, I would like you to answer first, as this is my confidence series. How do you define confidence for yourself or for your clients?
Yeah, so I would say that a definition of confidence, like while there is a broad definition and we know how to perceive confidence, I would say it's highly individual. Like how I feel confident may be completely different than how you feel confident. So when I walk into a room and I feel confident, like I know that I'm standing up straight and I feel at peace and calm, and like that I have everything within my grasp and my power. And so being able to move through the room without questioning self or doubting or being fearful or worried is how I think I would define confidence. Or specifically for my clients in a meeting, just feeling that level of peace and preparedness and calm that comes over you when you feel that you're in your space and in your power.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you introed it by saying that feels different for different people, because I'm definitely with you on the in your power definition, but not so much on the calm and peaceful, because that's just my energy is a little different. So for me, it's very high energy, taking up space, expanding. So it's really interesting. And that's one of the things I always want people to take away from these sessions is it's really up to you how you define it. You have to find and work with your confidence. And that's up to the individual. So before we dive into your topic, how about yourself? Is confidence something that has come hard for you, or is that something you felt good about most of your life? You have a very broad range of experiences. So that's why I wonder about that.
Yeah, that's a completely fair question. And I would say it depends on the day, right? Like, since I was a child, like there were days that I felt confident and good about what I was doing. And then there were other days that I was just like racked with self-doubt and like, what am I doing? Although I am super, super honest, as soon as I feel comfortable and confident on a regular basis, I throw something new in. I'm like, all right, it's time to do something new. Like I have reached my comfort zone and it's time to push outside of it. And so I do actively seek areas that I don't feel super confident in so that I can grow, because that tells me that that's an opportunity for growth and being able to push those boundaries a little bit further.
I love that. Is that something you have only been doing since you know, like the concepts that we learn as coaches, that growth happens outside of the comfort zone, or is that something you kind of naturally did when you were younger as well?
Yeah, I would say I was drawn to it when I was younger as well, but I didn't have the language to really talk about it. And the way I would used to talk about it is, oh, I'm bored. And now that I'm feeling bored, I need to find something to engage myself. And it was learning something new that always re-engaged me. It's not been until like this last year that I think I fully embodied that learning is one of my hobbies, because it definitely is. So yeah, the language has changed about it, but I would say that's always been true for me.
That resonates strongly with me, that I'm bored really means I'm spending too much time in my comfort zone usually. Yeah. And then, it's time to start something new. So how much does that impact when you work with clients? I always let my guests, so in case you're watching and you don't know that, my guests choose a term, a word that leads our conversation. And so Alexandria's phrase is human-centered leadership, or specifically creating human-centered leaders. So how does that, the way you explore your limits and go beyond your comfort zone, how does that affect how you work with people?
Yeah, so I always encourage people to push outside of their comfort zone while acknowledging that that is scary and that is hard, right? Going beyond what you already knew, being in that pioneer space can be terrifying, right? Because like, this is the poison I know. I don't know what's over there. And a lot of people will stop themselves from seeing what's on the other side because they don't know, and the unknown is scary. And that's at least how we're enculturated, is that the unknown is scary. And I challenge people to look at that differently. The unknown just is. It's just unknown. You know what this is. You know how uncomfortable you are right now. What if you could be more comfortable on the other side? What if you have an opportunity to learn something about yourself on the other side? And so really the way I approach it is I share my piece, and Esther Perel is one of my absolute favorite humans in the whole wide world. And she uses a thing where she talks about living through the fear. So it's acknowledging that the fear is there, but living through it anyway. And that's where the confidence comes in, I think. And so the human-centered piece of me sits with my client in the moment and acknowledges, yes, there is fear. How can we move through the fear so that we can actually gain the competence and confidence as we move forward?
I love that. Yeah, and it's indeed the difference between more confident people and everybody else. They have the same fear and self-doubt. They have just learned to do things anyway, right? Or some might override, some might push away, but then it's not the real confidence. The real confidence really comes in when you can be with your fear and still charge ahead, I guess, and into the unknown. And I'm sure that message with the uncertainty is received a little differently by your clients these days than a couple of years ago. Or, I would think with what's happened in the world in the last 2-3 years, has that changed the perception for people?
I think for some people, it made them more willing to accept and dive into the unknown, because they're like, look at what I just survived. Who cares, right? And other people, I would say, have shifted into even more fear. And so for some, their response is temperance and being even more cautious than they were before. And others are like, forget it. I'm all in. Let's shake it up. And so I do find that very interesting, and not even in a way that I could have predicted for each of my individual clients. Some people shocked me, and I was like, okay, cool. We're going to go here. And that's, I couldn't have predicted that was going to be how you reacted. And I don't know that they even knew, to be honest.
That's really when the big insights and transformations happen, right? That's the point where it's also good to have a coach by your side, because if you have that insight or that impulse for transformation by yourself, then it's hard to not apply old structures to it again, right? So how does when that is, let's say, one of your clients, really wants to do something else, and they are a leader in their environment.
Mhm.
How do you support them? Because that transition, that insight might be overwhelming and very much about them in that moment. Because yeah, I mean, at least for me, when I want to change something, it's first about me. So it's like with the fear. How do you lead them to that human-centered leadership approach?
Mhm. Yeah, so I challenge them to accept what is about them. Like, who is this change going to affect? What need or want is it of yours that this change is going to satisfy? And taking the radical responsibility that they are putting themselves first and acknowledging that at the forefront. And then, okay, how did you rationalize this change for everybody else based on your wants and needs? And how can you check in with the rest of your team or others in your org that it's going to have the impact that you're intending? And we walk through options of getting allies and buy-in for these changes and really checking in that this is a good solution for the organization, as well as acknowledging what is wrapped up in this. What story is it that you have wrapped up in this? And what are stories other people have wrapped up in this? Like, why is this the conclusion that you came to being the resolution? And what blind spots could you possibly be overlooking? And then encouraging them to find ways to illuminate those blind spots. And that looks different for everybody. Sometimes it's external feedback. Sometimes people can meditate on it themselves and be like, oh, you know what? There's this little feeling over here that I was kind of ignoring. And it can completely shift the solution that they had because they realize that, oh, there's a whole other department I wasn't acknowledging in this process.
Yeah, there's always that aspect of things I just don't want to see. Yeah, the blind spots or the hidden costs or all these things, and helping people see that and talk about it. I mean, that's a huge step. I'm wondering when you introduce someone, let's say someone talks to you for the first time and has read a little about you and said, well, what is that human-centered leadership? How do I become a human-centered leader? Or let's say a new manager in a first management role. How do you help them along on those initial steps?
Yeah, the initial steps is becoming highly aware of self and becoming that conscious leader. So what are you bringing to the table? What stories, what biases, what pieces of self are you either embracing or trying to stuff down or change because you're trying to be that perfect leader, right? So are you being vulnerable? Are you being transparent? What do you value? And then also knowing what motivates you and demotivates you. Do you know the working style that you hold or your communication style? And how fluid are you in both of those things? Once the people know themselves really well, then you can start to see other people in a different light and realize that we're all different, but we all have a magic or a genius to bring. So being a leader for me is about removing obstacles, preventing bottlenecks, really empowering the team to step into their area of genius, because my job is to support them doing what they're super good at. So through that with the new managers, and how do you create success for your team? Not just remove the roadblocks, not just remove the bottlenecks, but actually set them up for success. And we go through different ways of doing that. And once they know themselves, then we dig into, okay, do you know your team? Do you know what motivates and demotivates your team? Do you know what their values are? Are they, I will do whatever it is that I do for money because my life is outside of work. That's going to be a very different person to engage and to motivate in the workspace than somebody who highly values impact and purpose at work. So somebody who needs to have impact and purpose at work, you motivate them by keeping them challenged and keeping them in projects that they're passionate about. But until you talk to your team and until you understand that everybody has a different needle to move, it can be really hard to lead the team cohesively.
Absolutely. How do you help new leaders do that? Because many of them, I'm sure you have encountered a couple in the last 2 years. I have too. First-time managers who have never actually been in a room with their team.
How
do you help them get to know their team members in a way that helps them lead them in this human-centered way?
Yeah, so it is actually ends up being a little bit uncomfortable for humans who fall a little bit on that like task-oriented side of the task to human orientation. But remote management is just being a really good leader or manager. And so when you're in person, you have all kinds of opportunities that just present themselves. You can walk by somebody's cube. There ends up being a lot of opportunities to micromanage, which I always discourage. And you have to shift into a higher level of leadership, which forces you to think about what are the actual metrics that we're using to define success? How do we actually know if our team and individuals are meeting the expectations of success? And then how are you connecting with your team? Are you having one-on-ones? Do you have regular meetings in which everybody gets to engage? Are your meetings a top-down where you're just giving information, or are they collaboration events in which you can actually strategize together? Are you taking feedback from your team and finding ways to apply it? And really challenging them to look at their style and what they're doing, and if they can honestly say that they know their team.
I like that. That's because it's scary in the beginning, right? But I wonder if it's sometimes not even more scary, and tell me if I'm wrong, for people who have been in executive roles for a long time and are facing younger teams that might have different expectations of their manager than teams they have previously led.
Yeah, I would say that you hit it on the nose right there. I think this whole transition of going fully virtual has been harder on long-term executives, long-term leaders, that they've had their way of leadership for the last 20 years. And now they don't have all of those things that they rely on. And they're completely having to shift their purview and their framing of their teams. So I think it is harder for those people than somebody who this is how they've managed their whole time. And so it's not any different, right? Like, this is how I've engaged with my team for 2 years. Like, I don't know, it's normal, but to somebody else who hasn't, it's not normal. And yeah, scary, I think, is a piece of it, and having to acknowledge that you're holding on to old ways of thought. And then what I encourage the people who've been around for a long time and they're like, well, I don't know how to engage with my team. I don't know what they want from me. It's real simple. Just ask them. Like, you don't have to read minds, just ask.
Right. Mind reading does not work well for most of us. I mean, actually, for nobody. Just ask. Just ask. Yeah, that is really, I think if people take away one thing, that's that's the one. Just ask. How does, let's say, intergenerational learning come in here? Or maybe even reverse mentorship, which is an interesting concept.
Yeah.
How does that come in with human-centered leadership?
I would say that it's vital to human-centered leadership, although I would challenge the wording around intergenerational. While intergenerational leadership is definitely a thing, I would actually take it a little bit further out and just fully recognizing that people are different. Humans each have their ways of communicating and their own stories and their own perceptions, and all of those things color how we think and behave in the world. And so if you have had a whole set of experiences that have led you to this point in time, which obviously generational things, you have different big world life experiences, culture changes, so your enculturation changes depending on your age. But it's not always true even within a generation, right? Like, you can take a set of boomers and say, oh, well, boomers are this. Well, are they? Like, yes, they had some shared collection of enculturation to a point, and they all had an individual life. So that's where I really, really push the communication style fluidity and the working style fluidity, and understanding how you work best while also being capable of shifting your style to meet your team where they are, and encouraging them to work with opposite styles and attempt to push outside of their comfort zone of a working style. So just an oversimplistic, I already mentioned the task-oriented to human-oriented. Like the human-oriented person goes in all with the human, like who's on my team, who do I want to do what on the project, like it's all human first. Whereas a task-oriented person, we've got a long list of tasks to do and it doesn't really matter who's on the team, I just need somebody to check off the boxes. But if you can challenge yourself to flip it and say, okay, I'm human, but like, there's a whole bunch of tasks that need to be done. So how do I integrate all of these tasks and find the human that would do best at this? Or on the other side, okay, who do I want on my team who would actually be best to tackle these tasks, so that you can kind of be somewhere in the middle and float between that. And then really engaging with your team and how you communicate. Some people need time to prepare for a meeting. Other people want to just hear it all in the meeting and make decisions. Do you know that about your team? And how do you provide for both ends of the spectrum as the leader? Because that's your job, to make sure that everybody feels included and everybody is giving input.
Yeah. So that's your job as a leader, to include everybody. Doesn't that mean that it's not only that leadership is way beyond the managerial task? I mean, everybody can be a leader.
Yeah, I think it's learned. Everybody can. Yeah. People have to want to, I think, is a big thing. And I would say that we're all leaders in some aspect of our lives. Even if we don't have that job title at work, we're the leader of ourselves, right? So we have to start from within and know what we need to lead ourselves to all of our goals and things that we want to do. Or maybe you're in a community in which you volunteer a lot, or you're running a book club, or engaging with scouts for your kids. Like there's opportunities to be a leader all over the place. And so being willing to step into that role and knowing what that looks like is important, I think, for everybody.
So would you encourage everybody to find their little leadership role anyway, no matter if they are at the beginning of their career or wherever they are in their lives?
Yeah, I would for sure encourage that. Like if it's in the workspace, find a project that you're passionate about, right? Are you passionate about starting a volunteer program in your company? Like that's volunteer work is something that's super important to you. Can you organize that and run that? What about getting involved with the ERGs or opportunities that it's just a project you want to champion for your department? You're like, hey, this process is broken and I want to fix it. And just finding those little spaces in which you can step into that and try it on. Because there's a lot of people who are like, I don't want to be a leader. And it's like, but why? And it's usually they're lacking the confidence or the understanding and the know-how. And I'm not saying that everybody wants to be a manager, everybody wants to be a leader, wants the direct reports, but that doesn't mean that those skills aren't still important to even being an individual contributor.
Right. So, I mean, I totally see how not everybody would want to be a people manager, of course.
Yeah,
that's some people have other priorities and values for their work life, right? But the leadership piece is really separate from that.
Yes.
So especially you said everybody is the leader of themselves. Yeah. So I wonder, as you have a lot of experience in different fields. You come from counseling originally, right? And you have hospitality experience and tech and how does tech, I mean, which is basically now the industry, right, that defines our lives right now, or will be going forward, or everything has to be tech now to shape our lives. How is leadership different there than you've seen it in other spaces? Or maybe it isn't.
Yeah, I would say that it isn't, because, and that's my whole point with the human-centered, is humans are humans. And we don't stop being human when we clock into work. We don't stop being human because we got assigned to a new project or because something else changed. It's true. They think that the main thing that's changed in the different industries is when I was managing counselors, they have a different way of communicating, right? And so they're all highly trained in communicating their feelings and being in that space of acknowledging self and all of that. So it's a different level of how they're engaging with one another, but the conflict still happened. Oh, well, I don't like Susie because she does X, Y, and Z, and I can't possibly work with her. That still exists within the counseling field, right? And it's funny because I would say that they end up rationalizing it even more. They're just like, well, I know humans and I know myself, so it's just done. I can't possibly do it. And sometimes that blind spot like rears its ugly head. Moving into hospitality and tech, I would say that there's a lot of similarities in people want to do a good job. People want to engage and feel good and valued. And so if you can create opportunities for those successes on your team, then you're going to be a valued leader. If you can create that opportunity to champion for each of your team members and help them grow and develop, then you move into that space of being a respected leader, because that is what we're trying to do. We spend so much of our time at work that it doesn't have to be terrible. Let's find ways to make it good and inclusive and empowering.
Yes.
Because that's way more sustainable than leading from fear.
Yeah. So if I were, let's say, an ambitious woman in tech, not a manager, and I don't have this type of manager who is really inclusive yet and brings the transparency to the team, how can I, as a team member, make it more fun and more value oriented for the rest of the team to work every day?
Yes. Then you end up managing up, right? And that happens a lot. And that's another reason why having leadership skills is super important, because sometimes you do have to manage up. Even if you have a good leader, sometimes they have a bad day or sometimes they have a blind spot. And so they need that help too. So regardless of what kind of leader you have, what I would say is being aware of what kind of leader you have, how self-aware are they, and how do they react to feedback, and knowing those safe spaces in being able to articulate the things. So I would always encourage people to start with self and be like, okay, if I had my way, what would this team look like? How would I solve these problems that we have? And really come up with clear problems with clear solutions. And then start talking to the team about how do they feel about the things? What is their perception of what's happening? How would they like to see things change? And find the overlap. Find your ally, somebody else to help champion something with you. Because if you have more than one person bought in, it's more powerful to take it to the manager.
Yes.
And start to be the change that you want to see. If you want more collaboration and cohesiveness on your team, start reaching out to work on projects with somebody else. Start looking for the opportunities to collaborate. Ask more questions. Be that bold person who speaks up in the meeting and says, hey, I don't think that that's going to work. Here's why. And just be very clear and communicative and stating it from places that are unarguable. I'm having a thought that X, Y, and Z, or I'm feeling this. You're saying that you're doing that. Somebody can't argue with what you're perceiving or feeling. I mean, they can, but it's
they can, but yes. Oh, yeah.
Right. And then you can actually start to see the changes that you want to see.
I love that. I mean, be clear on what you want to see. Ask others, because they might have totally different views, but then probably someone in there is very much on your vibe here and can be an ally and can be your partner in crime when you communicate that and communicate clearly. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a very good starting point before you get into this terrible overwhelm where you start fearing to show up in meetings. And that's a point where we don't want to see people, right? That space.
And acknowledging that there are some toxic workspaces and there are some toxic managers and there are some places that aren't safe to articulate yourself and to push forward for those things. And so also not every space is good for every person. So just because you're struggling on a team and it's not a match for you, doesn't necessarily mean that it's just toxic. it might just mean it's not a good fit for you. So really digging into, okay, is this just not a fit for me, or is there actual harmful activity occurring here? And being very clear about the difference.
So how do I, let's say women in tech, because I think as a woman, like maybe the only woman on a team, it can be hard to make that distinction. Is it just not a great fit for me, or is it really the fact that I'm the only woman on that team and I don't have the safe space?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how do I